So a bit on Everest, the review is, if you will, we work with literally users, businesses, financial institutions. They access our ecosystem by getting our access token, right? The ID token. And then we do a bridge, usually across Ethereum mainnet, into our own, I call it an L2 ledger, right? It's like a side chain. And that one is incredibly fast, very cheap, right? We also bridge differently, but to fiat, right? So we literally hit all the local rails of ACH, SEPA, NPP, and lighting those things up around the world. So what we do that's interesting is we've got this whole ecosystem of, we call it EverID. It's biometrics, credentials like KYC, government IDs for users or institutions. It builds this account. And we do the same thing for organizations. They get an organizational identity with a wallet that can then be transferred, if you will, value between those using our stablecoin. So we're a regulated custodian where we literally can take dollars, euros, whatever in, convert it into, for example, AAVE stake, and push that back out across the network and into the AAVE ecosystem.
Right.
So to jump ahead, we started with identity. We literally take biometrics and literally everything about the person and do a full KYC. It builds that account. Think of it like a personalized Dropbox with your biometrics, your documents, your credentials, and your money or your crypto, right? This is where it gets really interesting. We can take a user identity and make what I call corporate identities. So we attach legal entity identifiers, right? Or BIC numbers with SWIFT or UBO information. So we did this actually with, you know, GLIFE, the Global Legal Entity Identifier Foundation.
Oh, okay.
Did that with ADB, ADB and GLIFE. We did a nice proof of concept showing like, hey, this is how shell corporations can't be around anymore. Because like, fuel, I'm one of the identities that's attached to the Everest corporate identity, right? And so you can join multiple entities. We do the full KYC, everything attached to the corporate identity and the user identity. Like I said, adding LEIs to everything or BICs makes it really easy. And ultimately, that account can be multi-sig. So, you know, you can actually start from an institutional point of view, you can start pushing money into AAVE. So a bit of how we do it too. I know you and Stani have both been talking about how to do compliance well. We take identities, we build this Ever wallet, so you can have a corp wallet. You can even have a separate personal wallet. You can even have your Citibank wallet. Does it make sense so far?
Yep.
Think about transactions in that paradigm I showed. We then took regulations in a few jurisdictions and mapped them into smart contracts. So in Australia, for example, we took Austrax, 46 pages, and did all of the if-then statements based on certain transactions. Like, do you have a 100-point identity check? For what transaction to go, oh, you're going the 7th time to, you know, send a $9,900 transaction to the US, right? And we just, if you will, matrix it out so that ultimately anything that gets sent is compliant, right? So all the identities are unique, which means you can use multiple wallets, but it's still a KYC'd user or organization, right? Other people can use their own wallets. That's fine too. All regulatory approved, travel rule, AML. the smart contracts for compliance automates everything, which means reporting's seamless and, if you will, real time. Right. And ultimately, we got a couple patents on this one too. So I'm throwing a lot at you right now. Any questions jump up in terms of?
Yeah. So does this essentially meet? There have been recent pronouncements from the U.S. Treasury that I think the crypto industry has been. They don't necessarily meet. That are sort of harsher than what fiat institutions have to comply with. I mean,
It's interesting.
Yeah. Does your
Yeah,
solution take into account the possibility?
this does exactly that. And by the way, the Europeans have already done it, right? We're regulated in Europe. We're actually a European company. FinCEN is catching up to Europe in terms of, hey, if you want to be a self-custody wallet, you want to own the keys, then you have the same reporting and compliance obligations as a financial institution. And that's fine. What I think we're going to see is the thresholds. Like, it seems like FinCEN overshot thresholds for crypto than what they would do with a normal payment provider or a bank. And so I bet that's going to come down to be in parity, right? Like, transferring value is transferring value, whether it's a ETH or it's USD or euros.
I think, and the challenge there has been that if I give cash to my brother, I don't have to report that irrespective of the amount, and maybe cryptocurrencies should be treated as digital cash in that scenario. But not to go too deep
Yeah,
into that, we'll see how that evolves.
agreed.
But in case it takes a certain direction, then I think it'll be
Yeah,
and even when I, let's say, move money from my bank account to somebody else's bank account, I guess in that case the custody of fiat is with the bank, and therefore the reporting obligation is also with the sending bank.
yep.
Which is essentially moving money. Now, if I'm hosting my own account, then the question is whether it should be treated as cash, the whole idea of self-custody, or will it be treated as a financial institution equivalent, and therefore I should be required to comply with the BSA and the reporting obligations and under it. I think that's a very interesting
By the way,
discussion that you're sort of implementing a higher obligation here.
I agree. And by the way, if my father were to give me a lot of money and say, hey, here's a gift, and it's cash,
Nice. Yeah.
he does have to report it, right? If I donate a whole bunch of things to charity, I have to report it. And if I donate cash, I have to report it. Like, these are like, whether it's cash or not, doesn't matter. It's transfer of value. You do have to report, right? That's just sort of a thing. We don't really weigh in either way on regulations. We just implement the tools.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I don't necessarily. We'll see what the direction is in terms of individuals transacting in digital currencies.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's quite useful that you're implementing some of those guidelines, and especially as AMLD6 comes about.
Right.
It's transcribed, it'll be useful.
I mean, MLD5 plus the MICA regulations, which is cut and paste from the Maltese, like, there are reporting obligations above 250 euro.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, that's a thing. Matter of fact, it's even over 70 euro in some cases. Where we're seeing the real fit with this is all the VASPs that want to enable sending to self-custody wallets. So, like, if I have an exchange wallet, and I want to send it to a friend, the reporting obligation on that VASP is they have to know who the recipient is. They got to know name and address. And so
Yeah.
what we've done, we implemented an easy, fast way to do that. Just like check the address. And by the way, we actually announced this with Ethereum name service. And
That's cool.
Ethereum, like, here's a way to transfer, like, just transfer just your name and address so you can get your transfer. You don't have to share anything else.
Mhm.
It's automated.
Yeah. Now, so in order for me to receive value, I need to subscribe to the Everest solution, have a wallet on the Everest platform.
You can put a wallet, if you see Corp wallet, bank wallet, remittance wallet, inside of the Ever wallet. We support, I call it a wallet array.
Mm-hmm.
You can put multiple wallets in there. Then you can have a self-custody wallet or a custody wallet in there too.
Right, but I cannot send money to or stable coins to a wallet that's not an Ever wallet. I mean, is an
Sure, you
arbitrary
can.
address?
Yeah.
I can.
The answer is yes, you can. If you're using our rails, our chain, we're a regulated entity. Now, if you want to do self-custody and send through us over mainnet,
Mm-hmm.
of course, you can do anything you want. That's totally up to you.
Fair enough.
You can say, so you can imagine, like, in regulated land, like we capture all the stuff you need to capture,
Mm-hmm.
which also leads to automatic reporting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we're talking transaction reporting, right? I mean,
Right.
yeah, okay.
So as a VASP or even as a self-custody user, it's like automatic reporting and all your taxes basically done instantly.
Okay, so are you integrating, is this your own tax software or are you integrating with the third-party tax
To be
tools?
fair, we're capturing all the transactions that happen, literally just we collate and literally package so that it can be integrated into a tax system. But it's no more, what was my baseline? I did 4 trades on Thursday and I sent this much in March, like all that stuff at the end of the year. Like you just hit a button with our thing and it's everything's.
So in DeFi, normally you're not necessarily transacting with another human, right? You may be just transacting with a smart contract.
Yep.
And the smart contract does not necessarily have a legal identity. So how do you, and then, there are smart contracts like interest earning tokens that allocate where you sort of accrue more interest bearing tokens on a block by block basis, and that has its own implications. So how does that work in the
Well, look, as a bit of background, I was GM at BitTorrent a few years ago. And so we saw literally what you're allowed to regulate and what you're not allowed to regulate. And protocols, which, and I throw smart contracts in there, are non-regulated. That's software. Like that's not an issue. It's and similarly, dumb clients, like just software. It's where you get into who's aggregating the APIs and actually doing some sort of disintermediation. If an entity does that, then they are regulated. Right
So
there.
if a smart contract, so let's take the example of a lending pool.
Yeah.
Right, where there are multiple depositors and multiple borrowers. So the smart contract is in a way aggregating liquidity.
Yeah.
But it's a piece of software that's not controlled by any individual. It's essentially governed by a DAO, with its own governance and so on.
Yeah.
But there is no individual or legal person sort of managing or controlling that DAO or the behavior or any software upgrades or anything, right? I mean, that's kind of where the best DeFi protocols are at. So how does that work in this scenario?
The protocols are free, clear, and beautiful. There's nothing to be regulated. It's where you need to get fiat in, and you need to have, for example, all the institutional money that's, if you will, regulated legal entities, and they want to put their funds into that. And so I'll show you right now. This is how Everest helps accomplish that with AAVE, right? Because so, for example, partners can come to AAVE or even to us because we're integrating AAVE and do fiat in, right? And so at that point, we create that wallet with the identity and the KYC because they're coming from traditional finance world, right? At that point, we'll take their fiat deposit. By the way, we can take their crypto deposit too. We've actually integrated local rails, so ACH, SEPA, NPP, adding PesoNet, about 4 others too, for really low, if you will, fast, cheap ways to get money in. So we'll take their money. Sorry, did you have a question? I did.
No, I'm listening.
Okay.
Carefully.
We then take that token, or sorry, that fiat, we wrap it in our stable coin and then turn that into AAVE stake. And that AAVE stake we put right back into the wallet. So it's a, if you will, seamless end to end. Now, the future piece that we're looking at is actually porting the AAVE protocol onto our L2 ledger, right? Plus it connects to our bridge to mainnet, and then we're at 5-second transactions for pennies, right? It's incredibly fast. And so as we see our partnership evolve, it's start with, let's go ahead and get institutional money to be able to come in. It also enables them to do liquidity pools legally, and right, and then ultimately add on to mainnet.
When you say AAVE stake, are we talking about the deposit or?
Yes.
Okay, so this does not refer to the staking, the AAVE staking of AAVE tokens, right? This is an actual deposit.
Yeah.
Just for terminology. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So let's say it's US. So you convert fiat to USDC, you deposit USDC into AAVE, and the user essentially receives an AAVE USDC interest accruing token in their Ever wallet.
Yeah, we literally convert it into our stable coin, which can then be converted into anything else.
Oh, so you're converting into your stable coin. Okay.
Yeah. So think of our stable coin as a USDC that's regulated in Europe and able to go globally.
Got it.
Right. So a lot of, what I was talking to Mark about is the local rails. We can take pesos, keen, if you will, rupiah in, converted into something that can get to AAVE, right? Plus the institutional money, right? Like, again, I think that ends up brings in more liquidity pools and brings in literally more depositors too, right?
This is quite handy. So I guess this solves addresses one aspect of not just institutional, but also, let's say, retail money coming in through regulated banks and so on.
Yes.
Which will happen. The whole embedded finance idea has been around at least for the last 2 years, and what we're building is really the internet infrastructure for embedded finance, right? The back end of it. Yeah. And then the DeFi will get composed and embedded into various financial services delivered through apps and custodians and various other front ends. Now, there are obviously other aspects that come into play, and those are typically around asset protection, consumer disclosures and transparency, and just overall consumer education, and then certain other prudential aspects as well, right? So when it comes to operational risk or sort of credit risk management things that we spend a lot of time on,
Yeah,
cybersecurity,
us too.
resilience, overall. Yeah, so all of those prudential aspects also come into play, and that's where I think we're very, very strong.
Yeah.
And yeah, so this is a very important component. But I think when it comes to using your own stable coin, liquidity is critical. So with USDC, for example, there is an extraordinary amount of liquidity right now. Tether has always been very liquid. So are there any
We don't have to
rails?
worry about liquidity in our model because we're issuing and redeeming ourselves. And
Right,
so
right.
literally we can convert it into Bitcoin, ETH,
USD,
USDC,
whatever. Right.
whatever, whatever.
And how does that work? You have bridges or API calls to exchanges, whatever else.
We have literally fiat and crypto accounts,
Mhm.
US, Europe, Australia,
Mhm.
Indonesia, Philippines, Mexico, and adding India and a few others right now.
Right. So you can tap into both centralized and decentralized liquidity pools for those assets. That
Exactly.
makes a lot of sense, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting. Thanks for bringing up like the level of rigor you have to have in order to get regulated and actually operate in this market well. Like go get 2-3 penetration tests from banks, go get the regulators to go kick tires, go do an MPC architecture and get SOC 2 going.
Mhm.
Like we're 2 years into being regulated. Like that's a thing. I
That's the
wouldn't.
thing.
That's a thing. Like that took some doing. um,
Yeah. I mean, we've been
yeah.
through a process for one of our entities. It's
Oh, that's right.
sort of so one of our entities has an electronic money license. So AAVE Limited, the
I
UK
saw.
has an electronic money license. It's obviously not related to the decentralized protocol, which is governed by the community, not by any of the entities or anything. The AAVE protocol is governed by the DAO, which is
Right.
essentially operated by the community voting process. Any parameter changes, any new assets, any risk parameters, anything that's material is set by the decentralized governance mechanism. And but for but I think this is something we continuously um,
You guys
explore.
did it
Now
really
on
well.
the
I
yeah,
mean,
on the institutional side, obviously, there are, but the good news is that quite a few rails have already been built, like the one you've just built here,
yeah,
right? So I think some of those interfaces through custody is another aspect, right? So who is essentially holding interest-bearing tokens,
yeah.
and yeah, who do you work with on the
We
cold storage side, for
we
example?
are we are a custodian.
You
So
are a custodian registered in.
Europe. So we started in Malta,
Mhm.
which then, if you look at the MICA regulations, roughly the same thing. But yeah, we're a registered and regulated custodian operating as such for 2 years now.
Mhm, mhm.
Um,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah, and to your point, like as soon as, if you will, the embedded finance pieces happen, I think we're going to start seeing my paycheck and I want to go put 10% to go get interest, right? It'll be transparent, right? It'll just happen in the background.
Starting in the background. Uh,
Yeah,
so and I think one of the things we do is we tokenize the credit line, right? So if you deposit into Aave, you get a credit line, and you can actually delegate that credit to someone else, which is a really, really cool feature because essentially what you're doing is you're getting a credit line from the decentralized protocol,
yeah,
and now that gives you the power to essentially delegate that credit line to someone else, and they can use it to borrow. So that's a pretty powerful feature, can be used for on-chain and off-chain lending.
yeah,
And even and some of that off-chain lending can be unsecured as well because the collateral has been posted with the protocol.
yeah.
And what you're doing in the in the rest of the world, in the in meat space, if you will, or off-chain world, is up to
Yeah.
you. So there are some pretty powerful features that we built. You know, you can do collateral swaps on Aave. So if your view on the value or the future value of collateral changes, you know, cheapest to deliver has been a concept in bond markets for a very long time. So collateral swaps are pretty powerful in giving people flexibility
Yeah.
in managing their collateral. So those types of features have been there in institutional markets for a while, and you know, bringing them to DeFi has been a pretty powerful thing.
Get them to DeFi, and then, if you will, a lot of what we're doing is how do you get it to mass market, right? How do you get 100 million users? Like, you need to get it
Yeah.
to, and by the way, to your point, like, we're looking at on ramps in lots of emerging markets.
Mhm.
And if you KYC them or get their biometrics and they have a wallet and they have collateral, you just de-risk them. They don't have to pay 25% on a loan. You can just literally go, let's see what the pools have based on the collateral and like the,
Yeah.
right?
Let the market decide in a
Let the
way,
market
right?
decide.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Now, putting on that, right? You talked about legal LEIs, and that's
Yeah.
a very, very powerful thing. And here is why.
Mhm.
So, you know, I used to work with Barclays, and I ran the risk data aggregation and calculation platforms. And as part of Basel III calculations, we had to rely on our internal legal entity structure.
Yeah.
And what happens is every bank ends up relying on their own, you know, legal entity structures, which is really inefficient.
Yeah.
And even within the same bank, sometimes you have multiple trees, right? And you don't
Yeah.
know the creditworthiness of the same entity or the same subsidiary of the same corporation.
Right.
What it really looks like across two different parts of the bank is often not the same. So one bank thinks that a subsidiary like General Motors India Limited has a
Right.
certain level of creditworthiness, and the investment bank has a different view. And then
Right.
suddenly you can't aggregate the credit exposure across the bank, right? With DeFi, hopefully, once you start, and LEI is a really important in the institutional context, right? Because if
Right.
you have a sense of creditworthiness of different entities, then you can start to build sophisticated credit aggregation, credit risk assessment and aggregation models, and really create a lot more transparency across the lending infrastructure and take off a lot of the systemic risk that currently exists in the system.
I agree. We're
That'll be a
seeing
very
it.
powerful thing going forward.
Yeah, you know, I can tell you, like, we worked with the trade finance team of ADB and then Glyph itself to do a proof of concept. And to your point, we ended up doing like corporate headquarters, then underneath them, nested subsidiaries, underneath them, each individual attached to that one. And to your point, it ended up with like, well, as soon as you do that, then like you end up with a subsidiary in Indonesia that goes like, I have this credit worthiness because it's these people, they're totally de-risked, it's transparent. And you can go like, now I can, you just
These
open
are
up.
the agreements. This is how it's consolidated.
Yep.
You know, these are the agreements between, or the credit guarantees between the parent entity and the subsidiary entity. So I think once we really, you know, look 3, 4, 5 years ahead and say, how will DeFi really scale in an institutional context, and how do we sort of move a lot of the institutional credit markets onto a decentralized, transparent, efficient, low systemic risk infrastructure? I think the LEI is coming to play in a big way. So that'll
Agreed.
be an interesting direction.
We started like core identity, right? It was
Mhm.
just, and if you get core identity, then you can do a corporate identity. If you do corporate identity, then, but we had to start there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Um,
That's a pretty powerful idea, right? Having clean credit aggregation that's transparent across multiple
yeah.
protocols on the decentralized internet. I mean, that's going to be incredible in terms of what it does to risk reduction.
Thank you for not everyone. I feel like I'm talking to not
Your
everybody
family.
understands that. So thank you. I mean, like the fact that you were like, oh yeah, at Barclays, like you don't understand. Like if you turn this knob this way, like the floodgates open. Like it's gonna be
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah. One of the directions in DeFi, right, that I keep running into is it the idea of bringing real world assets into DeFi, right? And then things around asset quality come into play, and then also I think what are the legal agreements that govern recourse around, an asset protection. As soon as you get into, let's say, property or real estate and tokenized real estate, then you're getting into, or art even, right? Real
Right.
world Mona Lisa and so on. Then you have to kind of have appraisers. You need data feeds to
Yep.
assess the quality of that collateral. You need to know what sort of legal agreements govern the behavior of counterparties in the real world
Yep.
and with jurisdiction and so on. So all of that complexity, I think, will get simplified as a result of the transparent infrastructure we're building. But I think you're building some of the core foundations of that, right? Which is, how do we map all of this complexity onto an
Yeah.
underlying identity and reputation infrastructure,
Right.
so that we can actually build efficient recourse mechanisms and really take out a lot of inefficiency from the way the lending markets work today.
Agreed. And by the way, like we've had folks come to us with, we can program our stable token to be, like I said, anything. So we've had folks come to us with land, right? And just go, here are the titles, the et cetera, et cetera. And by the way, tax credits too. Can you just tokenize tax credits? Of course. We literally
Yeah.
program our token and go like, okay, that's $10 million of a tax credit. Let's break
Yep.
that down and tokenize that. And since we issue redeem, to your point, and it's attached to, get back into, you can store the documents and the asset
Yeah.
credentials associated with that asset, then like, okay, it's pretty transparent.
Yeah, and certain protocols already accept like digital collectibles, right? Valuable
Huh.
digital art and so on as collateral. And then that creates, a lot of opportunity and some risk as well, right? As in terms of asset quality.
Sure.
You can have Mona Lisa and you can have a copy of Mona Lisa. They don't have the same asset quality.
Right.
So and collateral, and then, what does that do to the liquidity if you're borrowing against that collateral? So now the data infrastructure that's required to support that is essentially the same.
Right.
Right.
Exactly. Like how trustworthy is, if you will, the tax authority of Puerto Rico? Pretty trustworthy. How trustworthy are land titles that are scanned in
Yeah.
from,
Asia.
certain areas? Like
Yeah.
it, people are going to risk it differently.
Yeah, but I mean, right now, I think what we have with DeFi is the core infrastructure, right? So now I think of this as a bit of a Google thing, right? When you write PageRank, then PageRank is PageRank, and then on top of that, you start building massive complexity,
Yeah.
incredible sophistication in algorithms, and then you really scale it to web scale level, right? But you don't do that on day one, and I think where we have got to with DeFi today is just the core financial instruments and infrastructure. On top of that, now we start to build all of this beauty of the real world.
Yeah,
And I
thank you
think
for
the
using that metaphor. Like I keep reminding people, it's like Google existed for years with just PageRank, with no way to monetize it. They literally had to figure out how to monetize PageRank like 4 or 5 years into the company. Like,
it took a long time. It took a long time. People were criticizing
eh,
Google for not having a business model for at least 4 or 5 years,
yeah,
and then suddenly, ad what is it? AdWords. I
yeah,
mean, not a fan of the internet getting all advertising heavy, but I think there is a process of discovery, and then just the technical beauty of what they built, right, around scaling the algorithms, taking all of the data and feeding all of that data into optimizing the algorithm and building a certain amount of intelligence in from the real world, right? So I
yeah,
mean, how does language work? How do people actually do search? What are the human behaviors that
yeah,
govern search, or the e-commerce and so on? So a lot of that intelligence starts to get built in.
yeah.
With DeFi, I think we'll see, so I think people are starting to see the potential of where we're going, right?
So
I mean, we got more than PageRank now, right? We've got functioning
yeah,
protocols, we've got functioning markets with real humans actually creating value and delivering value on real internet, open internet platforms. So
yeah.
it's an incredibly exciting, but we need some of the infrastructure you're building, right?
Yeah, I was gonna
And
say like we're all sort of like everyone's like, I'm really excited about DeFi. Like it's literally going to change the planet, but we're still only right now, we're talking about 1 million wallets, right? And so, and we're
Yeah,
talking about like what I would call, the web 1.0, like we're basically doing email right now. Give it another 3-4 years and it's going to be like, no, here's enterprise grade, full AOL plus, if you will, Oracle, right? Like everything will be done in 3-4 years. And then like,
we'll be doing more, right? We're already, I mean, we've gone beyond where Amazon was with the bookstore.
right. It's a good
So
metaphor. Yeah.
we've gone further. We've gone quite a bit further than just Amazon with a bookstore. Amazon wasn't doing
Yeah.
what some of the decentralized exchanges or liquidity protocols are doing already, right? And I don't think people realize that necessarily.
Yeah.
But on top of that, the sheer amount of talent that is coming into the system, and a lot of the traditional financial services expertise, people like you and me, that's coming into the system and saying, okay, let's think about this from the first principles, right? What are we actually trying to do here, and not have some of the problems I described, right, where you have feeds being passed around and data breaks and reconciliation issues and the sheer amount of manual processes and inefficiency and all that pain that we've been trying to get rid of
Right.
inside the legacy financial system for years. I think that's going to be incredible.
It is. I would say, like, I talk with my team all the time. And like you said, first principles, I was like, imagine the end of the rainbow, 3, 4, 5 years, somewhere in there, and build back from there. Like
That's what we're
clean, scalable, principled based things that are about transparency, like just like that stuff. If you can figure that out, then you know what to build today. And you'll just build towards that. So
Yeah, someone needs to talk to Elon Musk about this, right? I mean, he's been out of fintech for a long time, and he's been fixing other stuff like space and cars and batteries and stuff, so clean energy. Maybe it's time to bring him back into fintech and say, look, dude, how are we going to do this from the first principles,
yep.
right? And I think that's what Stanny and other innovators are doing, really, which is sort of thinking about this and yourself
Yeah.
from the first principles and saying, what should this actually look like, right? Where we have this technology now that we didn't have before.
Yeah,
So really fascinating. I
it
mean, what
is.
a wonderful time to be in this space.